Welcome to Whispers in the Dark. Tonight, we return to the ancient city of Safed, where narrow stone streets climb a mountain wrapped in mist, and where the graves of saints and strangers lie beneath soil that remembers every word spoken above it. This tale is inspired by the old Jewish folklore known as the Finger, the dark legend that would one day inspire the story of a corpse bride. So lower the lights, draw the curtains, and listen carefully. There are promises that bind the heart. There are promises that bind the soul. And there are promises so carelessly spoken that even the dead may rise to claim them. Now, let's begin. Long ago, in the latter years of the 17th century, the city of Safed watched over the hills of Galilee like a pale stone sentinel. Its houses were built close together upon the steep mountainside, their roofs crowded beneath the stars, their courtyards hidden behind heavy wooden gates. Steps worn smooth by generations twisted between high walls. At dusk, the smell of bread, olive oil, hot wax, and wood smoke drifted through the passages. Lamps glowed behind latticed windows. Voices rose from houses of study, where old men bent over sacred pages and argued softly about matters of law, death, and eternity. Beyond the city walls, the land fell away into dark valleys and thick groves of cypress, oak, and terebinth. Springs bled cold water from cracks in the rock. Ancient burial places hid among roots and thorn bushes, some marked by stones, others forgotten beneath moss and weeds. The people of Safed knew that the ground outside the city held more bones than anyone could count. They treated it with respect. Children were warned not to wander there after sunset. Young men were told not to laugh among the graves. Travelers were advised never to touch what the earth had chosen to reveal. Most important of all, every child in Safed learned that sacred words were not toys. A vow spoken without thought could still be heard in heaven. A promise made in mockery could still find a witness. The tongue, the elders said, was a small piece of flesh capable of opening doors that the strongest hands could never close. Victor van Dort had heard all these warnings when he was a boy. On the night before his wedding, he remembered none of them. Victor was the only son of William and Nell van Dort, prosperous merchants, whose house stood near the upper quarter of the city. William was broad in the shoulder and trusted written accounts more than spoken affection. Nell was sharp-eyed, ambitious, and proud of every coin that had passed through the family ledgers. Victor had inherited neither his father's loud confidence nor his mother's appetite for status. He was thin, gentle, and awkward, with dark hair that refused to lie flat and long fingers that trembled whenever many people looked at him. He loved music more than commerce. He could spend an hour listening to rain collect in a clay jar, hearing rhythm where others heard only water. Yet he had been trained since childhood to accept that his life belonged partly to his family, partly to his community, and partly to promises made before he was old enough to understand them, before Victor and Victoria Everglot had been born. parents had made such a promise. Finis and Maudlin Everglot belonged to one of the oldest merchant families in Safed. Their wealth had diminished over the years, though their pride had not. During a winter of illness, when both Nell and Maudlin were expecting children, the two families had sat together beside a brazier. In gratitude for a profitable partnership, and in hope that their houses might be joined forever, they vowed that if one child were born a son and the other a daughter, those children would marry when they came of age. Victor was born in spring. Victoria arrived before the next new moon. Their future was decided before either could speak. To the surprise of both families, Victor did not resent the arrangement. Victoria was quiet, observant, and possessed of a calmness that softened the severity of her narrow face. Her dark eyes seemed almost black indoors, but in sunlight they carried a warm brown gleam. Victor believed that if he had been permitted to choose freely, he might still have chosen her. Their wedding was to be the grandest Safed had seen in years. Guests came from neighboring villages. Musicians arrived with drums, flutes, and stringed instruments. Lamps were strung between the walls, and a canopy of pale cloth waited upon 4 polished poles. On the evening before the ceremony, Victor's closest companions came to pull him away from the noise. Mayhew was a cheerful young man with round cheeks and a laugh that often became a cough. Barkis Bittern was taller, handsome in a hard and polished way, and fond of testing the courage of others. The three had known one another since boyhood. Mayhew made jokes because he feared silence. Barkis made jokes because he feared appearing weak. Victor laughed with them because he did not want either man to see how badly his hands were shaking. They slipped through the northern gate before it closed and followed a familiar path down the slope. The moon was full. Its light silvered the stones and gave the distant hills the smooth appearance of sleeping animals. Behind them, Safed shone with scattered lamps. Before them, the forest gathered in black layers. They wanted cool air, solitude, and a few final hours in which Victor could pretend that nothing in his life would change when the sun rose. Mayhew carried wine. Barkis carried bread and olives. Victor carried the ring he was meant to present during the ceremony, a plain band of gold engraved inside with the initials of his family. He had been told not to lose it. Nell had repeated this warning 6 times. As they walked, Barkis imitated the solemn voice of Rabbi Gauswells and urged Victor to practice the wedding words. Victor's voice cracked, and his friends laughed. Their teasing was affectionate at first. The wine made it louder. Soon, all 3 were stumbling through the trees, daring one another toward greater foolishness. The forest seemed to absorb the sound. The path carried them toward a river that ran cold through the valley. There, broad rocks rose above the bank, smooth enough to sit upon. The young men stopped to eat and drink. Water murmured below them. Moths fluttered in the moonlight. Somewhere in the trees, a night bird gave a single low call and then fell silent. Mayhew Mayhew was the first to notice the smell. It was faint beneath the damp odor of the river, yet once noticed, it could not be ignored. It was sweet and rancid, like fruit left to rot in a sealed jar. Mayhew wiped his nose and accused Barkis of carrying spoiled fish. Barkis tossed the remaining food at him. "Perhaps the bridegroom is already dying of fear," he said. "Perhaps we are smelling the first stage of his decay." Victor smiled weakly. His attention had fixed upon a patch of pale earth a few paces from the river. Something was sticking out of it. At first, he thought it was a root. It rose at a slight angle from beneath a snarl of dead grass, narrow at its base and thicker near the end. Moonlight shone upon a curved object at its tip. Victor stepped closer. The smell grew stronger. "What have you found?" Mayhew asked. Victor crouched. The object was gray, almost the color of clay, and wrinkled along its length. At the end was a dark nail, cracked down the middle. A strip of colorless skin clung around it. His stomach tightened. "It resembles a finger." Barkis came beside him and grinned. "Then the earth is asking for a ring." Mayhew stopped laughing. "Leave it alone." Barkis nudged the protruding thing with the toe of his shoe. It gave slightly. A bubble rose through the wet soil beside it and burst with a soft, obscene sound. The smell that escaped was thick enough to taste. Mayhew gagged. "That is no root." "All the better," Barkis said. The wine had made his eyes bright. "Here is a bride who cannot complain about Victor's stammer." Victor should have walked away. He later remembered the exact moment in which wisdom called to him. It was not a voice. It was the sudden stillness of the forest. The river seemed to hush. The leaves stopped moving. Even the insects fell silent, as though every living thing around them had sensed a boundary and was waiting to see whether he would cross it. Then Barkis laughed, and Victor's shame overcame his fear. "Go on," Barkis said. "Show us how boldly you will speak tomorrow." Victor reached into his coat and removed the wedding ring. The gold caught the moonlight. Mayhew seized his wrist. "Do not. It is only a piece of wood," Victor said, though the words felt false in his mouth. "Then why does it have a fingernail?" Barkis pulled Mayhew's hand away. "Let him practice." Victor knelt in the damp earth. The thing protruding from the ground was cold when he touched it. Not cool like stone or wet like a root. It possessed the deep, consuming cold of meat taken from a winter cellar. Its surface shifted beneath his fingers. The gray skin slipped against whatever lay within it. Victor almost dropped the ring. Behind him, Barkis whispered encouragement. Mayhew begged him to stop. Victor pushed the gold band over the cracked nail. The skin peeled back in a soft curl. Beneath it, something white gleamed. Bone. Victor froze. The ring rested around the dead finger. From somewhere below the ground came a small scraping sound. Barkis no longer smiled. Mayhew began to pray. Victor tried to pull the ring off, but the swollen joint held it fast. Panic prickled across his scalp. The ancient warning returned to him with terrible clarity. Sacred words were not toys, yet fear of looking foolish still held him. He told himself that the finger belonged to a body buried too close to the surface. He told himself that dead flesh could contract in cold night air. He told himself that the scraping beneath the soil was the movement of water. Then he looked at his two companions, two witnesses. The thought passed through his mind like a black bird. He should have listened to it. Instead, Victor straightened his back, took the finger in his hand, and spoke. "Behold, you are consecrated to me with this ring, according to the law of Moses and Israel." The finger twitched. Mayhew whimpered. Victor stared at it. The nail shifted against the gold with a faint click. "Say it again," Barkis whispered, though all mockery had left his voice. Victor's tongue felt swollen. Wine, pride, and terror wrestled inside him. He could have stopped. One utterance might have been dismissed as unfinished foolishness. He spoke the vow a second time. The earth beneath his knees pulsed, not shook, not settled. It pulsed, lifting him gently and sinking again, as if something enormous below the soil had drawn breath. The dead finger bent around his hand. Its grip was weak, yet unmistakable. Victor screamed and tried to rise. Barkis caught his shoulders, either to help him or to keep him from fleeing. Mayhew backed toward the river, his hands clamped over his mouth. "One more," Barkis said. Perhaps he believed that completing the ritual would end whatever had begun. Perhaps some malevolent curiosity had entered him. Perhaps the dead woman below them had already found the hollows of his mind and spoken through his lips. Victor never knew. He only knew that he heard himself repeat the sacred vow for the third time. The ground split open. A sound like a wet sheet tearing came from beneath the grass. Cracks raced through the pale earth. Black soil heaved between them. The finger clenched hard enough for its bone to press against Victor's palm. Then the entire hand erupted from the grave. It broke through the soil wrist first, flinging clods of mud across Victor's coat. 5 dead fingers opened and closed in the moonlight. 2 nails had fallen away. A beetle crawled from beneath the rotted thumbnail. The wrist was wrapped in stained linen, and where the fabric had torn, Victor saw tendons stretched like yellow cords beneath skin mottled green and black. The hand twisted until the bones ground against one another. It seized Victor's sleeve. He fell backward, dragging it with him. The arm emerged to the elbow. Soil poured from rents in its flesh. Pale worms boiled inside the hollow where muscle had liquefied. Mayhew ran. Barkis remained for one heartbeat longer, staring as the earth opened in a long, crooked wound. A shoulder forced its way upward. The dead woman did not rise gracefully. She excavated herself. Her fingers clawed at roots and stones. Her arm pulled while the buried body thrashed below. The soil above her face bulged. Something struck it from underneath, once, twice, then a third time. The crust collapsed inward, revealing a mouth packed with black earth. The corpse opened its jaw. Mud spilled over broken teeth. It tried to breathe. The first breath entered ruined lungs with a bubbling rattle. The chest swelled beneath the shroud. Ribs cracked after years of stillness. A jet of brown fluid burst from the nose. The corpse choked, coughed, and vomited a rope of grave soil threaded with pale larvae. Barkis screamed and fled after Mayhew. Victor could not move. The dead hand had wound his sleeve around its fingers. It pulled him closer as the woman dragged herself free. Her other arm broke through the ground. One shoulder came loose with a thick sucking noise. The head rolled sideways, revealing a cheek that had collapsed against the teeth beneath it. Long strands of hair clung to the skull in wet ropes. The remnants of a bridal veil were tangled among them, brown with age and perforated by insects. She wore a burial shroud over what had once been a wedding dress. The cloth was fused to her body by decay. Roots had grown through the bodice and between the ribs. One thick white root entered beneath the collar and emerged from a hole in her abdomen. As she pulled herself higher, it stretched. Her body jerked against it. She clawed at the root. Her fingers tore open her own stomach. The flesh parted like soaked cloth. Dark liquid spilled into her lap. She gripped the root in both hands and wrenched it free from herself. Something inside her abdomen tore loose with it and landed on the grass with a soft slap. The corpse showed no pain. She continued climbing. Her hips broke through the grave. Her legs followed, thin and crooked beneath the dress. One knee bent in the wrong direction, then snapped straight when she put her weight upon it. The bones punctured the skin before sliding back into place. Her bare feet were little more than cages of bone wrapped in gray strips of flesh. At last she stood. Soil cascaded from her body. The smell struck Victor with such force that he retched. It filled his mouth and throat. It smelled of damp linen, open bowels, stagnant water, and the secret sweetness of flesh returning to earth. Flies appeared as if summoned from the darkness. They settled around her eyes and crawled between her lips. The corpse lifted her left hand. Victor's ring gleamed upon it. Her face turned toward him. One eye was gone. The empty socket writhed with tiny white bodies. The remaining eye had dried into a dark bead beneath a lid that no longer closed. Her lower lip was missing, leaving her teeth exposed in a permanent, dreadful smile. Yet when she looked at him, Victor felt a human hunger inside that ruined face. Not hunger for meat, hunger for recognition. The corpse opened her arms. "My husband," she cried. Her voice was not one voice. It was the groan of earth under a coffin, the scrape of nails against wood, the last breath of a woman dying alone, all forced through a throat that should have been silent. Victor tore his sleeve from her grasp. The dead fingers came away with the cloth. 3 of them remained wrapped around it, still twitching. He ran. Branches whipped his face. Thorns opened his hands. Behind him, the corpse bride gave a wail so loud that birds exploded from the treetops. My husband. The moon vanished behind a bank of cloud. Victor ran blind. He struck a tree, fell, and rolled down a slope through stones and briars. His shoulder slammed against the ground. Blood filled his mouth. For a few seconds, he lay stunned, listening. Something moved among the trees above him. It did not walk like a living woman. One dragging foot scraped through the leaves. The other struck the ground in stiff, uneven blows. Between each step came the clatter of loose bones and the wet rustle of her shroud. Victor crawled to his feet. "You called me," Emily said from the darkness. It was the first time he heard her name, though she did not explain how he knew it. The sound formed inside his head, while her ruined voice echoed among the trees. Emily. She had been waiting beneath the earth, with no name upon a stone. "You placed your ring upon me." Victor ran toward the distant lamps of Safed. Mayhew and Barkis were far ahead. Their cries rose from the path. Victor heard Mayhew pleading at the closed gate, heard the guards shout in alarm, heard the wooden bar being lifted. Then cold fingers brushed the back of Victor's neck. He felt cracked nails catch in his hair. He threw himself forward. A handful of hair tore from his scalp. Emily's shriek followed him to the gate. The three men tumbled inside. The guard slammed the doors. The bar dropped into place just as something struck the other side. The wood shuddered. Dirt sifted from the arch. "My husband." The guard crossed himself in the manner of foreign soldiers, then remembered where he stood and began reciting every prayer he knew. Victor, Mayhew, and Barkis fled through the city without explanation. They agreed before parting that no one must learn what they had done. Shame guided them where courage could not. Mayhew feared punishment. Barkis feared ridicule. Victor feared that if he described the event aloud, the sacred words would become real. He entered the Van Dort house through a rear gate. Servants were still preparing food in the courtyard. Nell's voice came from an upper room as she argued about the arrangement of lamps. William sat over his accounts, unaware that his son carried the stink of an opened grave into the house. Victor washed his face and hands. Black soil remained beneath his nails. He burned the torn coat, but the smell clung to his skin. He scrubbed until his knuckles bled. Each time water touched his left hand, he felt the dead finger bending around it. At sunrise, bells sounded from the market and voices filled the lanes. Daylight made the night seem impossible. Mayhew arrived pale and feverish. Barkis came soon after, his face carefully composed. The three met in the storeroom. "We saw an animal," Barkis said. "A sick animal caught beneath the ground." Mayhew stared at him. "It spoke." Fear speaks in many voices. "It called him husband. Then we were drunk." Victor said nothing. Barkis gripped his arm. You are to be married within hours. If this is known, your family will be disgraced. The rabbi may delay the ceremony. Victoria may refuse you. We say nothing. Mayhew looked at Victor. What of the ring? Victor's empty hand answered him. They told Nell that it had fallen into the river. Her anger was immediate and magnificent. She sent a servant to a goldsmith and demanded a second ring before the ceremony. William scolded Victor for carelessness. Neither noticed that his son flinched whenever someone said the word ring. By late afternoon, the city had clothed itself for celebration. The wedding canopy stood in the great courtyard. Lamps hung from cords overhead. Musicians tuned their instruments, while children ran between the benches. Merchants, scholars, craftsmen, and relatives crowded together in their finest clothing. Beyond the walls, the sun sank red over the hills, staining the stone towers and roofs. Victoria waited inside with Maudlin and Nell. She wore a gown of cream-colored silk embroidered with pomegranate blossoms. A light veil covered her dark hair. Though her mother complained about the heat, the guests, the musicians, and the quality of the flowers, Victoria remained still. When Victor entered, their eyes met. His fear eased. For the first time since the forest, he believed he might escape what he had awakened. The dead belonged to darkness, but the courtyard blazed with lamps. The dead belonged outside the walls, but he stood among hundreds of living souls. The dead possessed the words of a drunken jest, but Victoria possessed the promise of two families and the affection of a lifetime. Rabbi Gauswells stood beneath the canopy, stern and tall, his white beard resting against his dark robe. His voice carried across the courtyard without effort. The ceremony began. Blessings were spoken. Wine was poured. Victor looked at Victoria and saw trust in her eyes. A servant placed the replacement ring in his hand. The musicians fell silent. Victor reached for Victoria's finger. Something screamed beyond the gate. The sound rose above the city, above the wind, above every human voice. Lamps flickered. Glass cups trembled upon the tables. A child began to cry. The gate shook. Once, twice. On the third blow, the wooden bar split. The doors opened. Emily stood in the passage. She had followed him into daylight. The dry air had changed her. Her skin, swollen and wet beside the river, had tightened across her bones. One side of her face had split from temple to jaw. The loose flap swung when she moved, revealing black muscle and yellow teeth. The fingers torn away in the forest had not returned. From the ruined hand projected 3 narrow bones, polished at the ends where they had dragged across stone. Her wedding dress hung in strips. Hundreds of flies moved beneath the cloth, making it ripple over her ribs. Where Victor had seen the torn opening in her abdomen, the body had folded inward. Beetles nested in the cavity. Roots dangled between her legs. The ring remained on her left hand. She raised it. The crowd erupted. People overturned benches and trampled food in their flight. A musician dropped his instrument and fell beneath the feet of the guests. Finnis dragged Maudlin toward the house. Nell screamed at William to save Victor, while William pushed her through a doorway ahead of him. Barkis disappeared into the crowd. Mayhew collapsed against a wall, sobbing. Victoria did not run at first. She stared at the corpse, then at Victor. The question in her face wounded him more deeply than any accusation. Emily walked into the courtyard. Each step left a print of black moisture. Flies rose around her in a humming cloud. A strip of scalp slid from her skull and hung beside her ear. She did not notice. "What blemish does my bridegroom find in me?" she cried. "That he should seek to wed another." Only Rabbi Gauswell's remained beneath the canopy. He looked upon Emily with disgust, sorrow, and anger. Yet he did not retreat. "Woman," he said, "why have you abandoned your place among the dead?" Emily pointed at Victor. "Because my husband called me." She lifted the ring before them. "All may see that he has consecrated me." Victoria turned to Victor. "Is this true?" He tried to answer, but no sound came. Rabbi Gauswells struck his staff against the stone. "Victor Van Dort, speak." The remaining guests had pressed themselves against the distant walls. Victor stood alone between the living bride and the dead one. He confessed. He described the walk through the forest, the protruding finger, the foolish laughter, and the ring. His voice grew quieter with each word. When he repeated the sacred formula he had used, Emily gave a shudder of pleasure. A nest of flies poured from her mouth. The rabbi's expression darkened. "How many times did you speak the vow?" "3. Were witnesses present?" Victor looked toward Mayhew and Barkis. Mayhew covered his face. Barkis stared at the ground. "2 witnesses," Victor whispered. Rabbi Gauswells closed his eyes. The corpse bride laughed. The sound was thick and broken, but there was triumph in it. "My husband." Victor fainted. When he awoke, he was inside his parents' house. William paced near the bed. Nell sat rigidly beside him. Victoria and her parents had returned to their own home. The wedding guests had scattered across Safed, carrying the story into every lane. Rabbi Gauswells stood by the window. "The court must be convened," he said. Victor struggled upright. "Surely there can be no question. There are words, there is a ring, there are 2 witnesses. She is dead. That is the question. Where is she?" The rabbi looked into the courtyard below. Emily waited outside the gate. She remained there for 3 days. The people of Safed barred their doors. Mothers pulled children away from windows. Shopkeepers closed before sunset. No one passed the Van Dort house without hearing the corpse bride whispering to Victor through the wood. "Come to me. Complete what you began. Give me the hour denied to me in life." During the day, she stood motionless in the sun while her skin dried and cracked. At night, she circled the house, scratching at the gate with her exposed finger bones. Once, Victor saw her upon a neighboring roof, cradling the torn piece of his coat, and the fingers still wrapped around it. "Tomorrow," she called, "the wise men will tell you that you belong to me." On the third day, Rabbi Gauswells summoned the court. The chamber stood beside the synagogue. Its walls were thick, its windows narrow, and its shelves burdened with sacred books and legal writings gathered over many generations. The oldest men of Sa Fed entered after ritual preparation. Elder Gutknecht, whose knowledge of burial customs exceeded that of any other man in the city, sat beside Rabbi Gauswells. Scholars filled the remaining benches. William and Nell came with Victor. Finis and Maudlin arrived with Victoria, who wore no ornaments and carried no flowers. Mayhew and Barkis waited near the door. At noon, Rabbi Gauswells called for the claimant. The chamber grew cold. Emily entered. No one had opened the door for her. One moment, the entrance was empty. The next, she stood upon the threshold, shedding dust. Men who had spent their lives studying death covered their mouths. Her remaining eye had collapsed. She was blind now, yet she turned unerringly toward Victor. Most of the flesh had fallen from her jaw. When she spoke, her tongue moved inside a cage of exposed teeth. "I am here." The court required her name. "Emily, daughter of whom?" The corpse tilted her head. Something cracked in her neck. "The earth has eaten his name." "Where did you live?" "The walls have fallen." "How long have you been dead?" Emily lifted her ruined face, as if listening to years passing overhead. "Long enough for every person who remembered me to join me." Elder Gutknecht asked how she had died. For the first time, the corpse hesitated. Her 3 remaining fingers moved to the cavity in her abdomen. "Waiting." The word filled the chamber with an unbearable sadness. She told them that while living she had been promised marriage, but sickness came to her father's house before the ceremony. One by one, the people who should have prepared her wedding prepared shrouds instead. Her mother died. Her sisters died. The man pledged to her fled the city and never returned. Emily survived the sickness only long enough to learn that no bridegroom was coming. She died unmarried. Floods struck the valley during the week of her burial. Those who carried her body feared the storm. They placed her in a shallow grave, intending to return when the water receded. No one returned. For years, she had lain close enough to hear footsteps. She heard wedding processions pass on distant roads. She heard songs carried from Sa fed by the wind. She heard brides laugh as they traveled toward new homes. Seasons peeled flesh from her bones. Roots entered her body. Water filled her grave and withdrew. Still, some part of her waited for the hour she had been denied. Then Victor placed a ring upon her finger. Then Victor spoke the words. Once, twice, 3 times. "He woke me," Emily said. "He called me bride before heaven and witnesses." I answered. Rabbi Gauswells asked whether she would willingly surrender her claim. Emily's jaw opened wider. The skin at the corners tore. No, you know, he did not intend the vow. The lonely dead do not feast upon intention. We are given what reaches us. You know, he was promised to another. Emily turned toward Victoria. Though blind, she found her. Then let the living woman return to waiting. I waited longer. Victoria's face blanched, but she did not look away. Emily faced the court again. I demand that my marriage be recognized. I demand that my husband come to my grave. I demand the hour of joy that was stolen from me. The chamber filled with the scrape and flutter of insects inside her body. Rabbi Gauswells called Mayhew. Mayhew shuffled forward, shaking so violently that his teeth clicked. He swore to tell the truth. Under questioning, he confirmed every part of Emily's claim. Victor had placed the ring upon her. Victor had spoken the correct words. He had repeated them 3 times. Mayhew and Barkis had both heard him. Did Victor believe the finger belonged to a living woman? Asked Elder Gutknecht. No. Did he intend to take its owner as his wife? No. Did he speak freely? Mayhew looked at Barkis. We mocked him, we urged him, but no hand forced him. The court dismissed Mayhew and called Barkis. Barkis answered with greater confidence, yet the truth was the same. He admitted suggesting the jest. He admitted urging Victor to continue after the finger moved. When asked why, he had no answer. Emily leaned close as he passed her. There is room beside me, she whispered. Barkis fled the chamber. Victor was called. He stood before the court with his hands clasped to hide their trembling. He confessed without excuse. He had known the words were sacred. He had spoken them in mockery. He had continued after the dead finger moved. His pride had outweighed his reverence. I did not wish to marry her, he said, but I cannot deny what I did. Emily reached for him. A clump of skin fell from her wrist. Come, husband. Victor stepped away. The court then heard William and Nell. They testified that Victor's betrothal to Victoria had been pledged before his birth. Finis and Maudlin confirmed it. The 2 families had made their vow in good faith, in the presence of respected members of the community. The children had been raised with knowledge of the agreement. Preparations for their marriage had begun long before Victor entered the forest. The court questioned Victoria last. She stood where Emily had stood. Do you still wish to marry Victor Van Dort? Rabbi Gauswells asked. Victor looked down in shame. Victoria studied him. I wish he had trusted me with the truth, she said. I wish he had possessed enough wisdom not to mock what is sacred. I wish that fear had not made a coward of him. Victor closed his eyes. But none of those wishes changes the promise made between our families. Nor does his foolishness give the dead the right to drag him from life. Emily hissed. The sound came from every crack in her body. Victoria turned toward her. I pity what happened to you. Do not pity me. I pity the woman you were. I fear the thing you have become. Emily lunged, her arms stretched toward Victoria. The ring flashed. Dead fingers closed around the young woman's throat. The court erupted. Victor seized Emily's arm. The skin came away in his hands. Beneath it, the bones moved within strings of black tendon. Elder Gutknecht struck the floor with his staff and shouted words of prayer. Rabbi Gauswells stepped between the two brides. Enough! The command cracked through the room. Emily released Victoria. 5 black marks darkened the living woman's neck. The corpse bride backed away, swaying. Pieces of her fell with each movement, yet her voice remained defiant. Judge, the elders withdrew behind a heavy curtain. Hours passed. No one left the chamber. Emily stood in the center, slowly coming apart as dust leaked from the seams of her dress and beetles dropped from her ribs. As evening approached, the temperature fell. Breath smoked before the mouths of the living. Lamps burned blue. Victor thought of the grave waiting in the forest. He imagined lying beside Emily in the wet earth. He imagined roots probing his eyelids and entering his mouth. He imagined his body swelling, splitting, and softening against hers, while the weight of the soil crushed them into one shapeless mass. He imagined her arms around him through every stage of decay. When his flesh vanished, her bones would still cling to his. When his name was forgotten, she would still whisper husband into the darkness. Emily moved close. "You see our chamber," she said. Victor could not answer. The earth is warm when two lie together. Her breath touched his cheek. It smelled like an open tomb. "You will learn to love me when there is no one else left to remember." The curtain opened. Rabbi Gauswells and the elders returned. Everyone rose. The rabbi held a written ruling. He looked first at Victor, then Victoria, and finally Emily. "The court has considered the testimony." Emily became utterly still. It is true that Victor Van Dort placed a ring upon the hand of Emily. It is true that he spoke the formula of betrothal 3 times. It is true that 2 witnesses heard him. These acts cannot be dismissed merely because they were performed in jest. Sacred words retain their weight even in the mouth of a fool. Victor's knees weakened. Emily lifted her head. Yet the law does not consider words alone. It considers intention, capacity, obligation, and the order in which claims were made. The corpse bride's fingers curled. Victor did not know he addressed a woman. He possessed no intention to enter a marriage with the dead. Before his birth, he was pledged to Victoria Everglot by the solemn agreement of their families. A later vow made in ignorance cannot erase an earlier obligation knowingly accepted. Emily began to tremble. Dust shook from her veil. Rabbi Gauswells raised his voice. "Above all, those who have departed this world do not possess a claim upon the bodies of the living. The grave may receive what is given to it by heaven, but it may not reach beyond its boundary and seize what remains in life." The corpse bride opened her mouth. No sound emerged. Therefore, said the rabbi, the supposed betrothal between Victor Van Dort and Emily is without force. The marriage is declared null. Victor is released from every claim made by the dead. Silence filled the chamber. Victor exhaled. Emily screamed. The first note split the glass in the lamps. The second sent blood running from Mayhew's ears. The third seemed to tear open the chamber itself. It was the cry of a bride abandoned at the canopy. It was the cry of a woman waking in darkness with soil packed against her face. It was the cry of every lonely year she had spent listening to life pass above her grave. The walls shook. Books fell from their shelves. Men dropped to their knees and covered their heads. Emily reached for Victor. Her arm broke at the elbow. The lower half struck the floor, still grasping. She took one step. Her left foot shattered beneath her. The dry bones burst through the skin and scattered across the stones. Still, she came toward him. Husband. Her chest collapsed. The ribs folded inward one after another, crushing the nests of insects within. Black fluid sprayed through the wedding dress. The spine bowed with a series of sharp cracks. Her abdomen split completely, and everything the grave had left inside her spilled onto the floor in a steaming, writhing heap. Emily dragged herself forward with her remaining arm. Husband. The jaw fell from her face. It struck the stone and broke in two. Her voice continued without it. The sound came from the hollow skull, from the empty chest, from the scraps of cloth rubbing over exposed bone. Husband. Her skull caved inward. For an instant, it folded like damp parchment. Then it burst. Fragments of bone struck the walls. A cloud of gray dust expanded through the chamber, carrying dead flies, hair, teeth, and shreds of veil. Her body collapsed. The spine separated into pieces. The pelvis split. Her remaining limbs struck the floor and disintegrated beneath their own weight. Bone became fragments. Fragments became powder. The wedding dress settled over the ruin, empty, except for a heap of bones and dust. The scream ended. Victor's first ring fell from the remains. It rolled across the stones in a widening circle. Every person in the chamber watched it. The circle narrowed. The ring trembled. Then it lay still at Victoria's feet. No one moved for a long time. At last, Elder Gutknecht brought a clean linen cloth. With prayers and careful hands, he gathered every fragment that could be found. The men searched beneath benches for teeth and finger bones. They swept the gray dust from the cracks between the stones. They placed the torn pieces of Emily's dress with her remains. The ring was removed, washed, and returned to Victor, though he would never again permit it to touch his skin. Before sunset, a procession left Safed. There were no musicians. No one spoke. Victor, Victoria, their parents, the witnesses, the elders, and many citizens followed Emily back to the forest. She was carried in a small wooden casket lined with white cloth. Though the box weighed little, 4 men bore it, for no one wished to carry the dead woman alone. At the river bank, they found the open grave. The earth around it was torn by roots. Worms covered the hollow where Emily had lain. The piece of Victor's coat remained nearby, still wrapped in the 3 severed fingers. Elder Gutknecht lifted them with a cloth and added them to the casket. A new grave was dug far deeper than the first. The work continued until the men stood below the height of their own heads. Stones were placed around the body. Proper prayers were spoken. Emily was lowered gently into the earth, not as a monster, not as a rejected bride, but as a dead woman whose first burial had been neglected, and whose loneliness had outlived her flesh. Victoria stepped to the edge. She dropped a handful of soil upon the casket. "May you find the peace that was denied to you," she said. Victor added his own handful. He did not ask forgiveness. He understood that forgiveness was not his to demand. He promised only that he would never again speak a sacred word without meaning it. The grave was filled. Heavy stones were laid across it. Nothing moved beneath them. The wedding took place the following day. The same canopy was raised. The broken lamps were replaced. The guests returned, though their celebration was quieter. Dark bruises remained around Victoria's throat. Cuts covered Victor's hands. Mayhew wore cloth over his injured ears. Barkis stood at the edge of the gathering and did not make a single joke. When the ring was placed in Victor's hand, he looked toward Rabbi Gauswell's. The rabbi nodded. Victor spoke the vow once, clearly, intentionally, with all his heart. Victoria accepted the ring. No scream came from beyond the walls. No dead hand rose from the earth. The ceremony was completed, and the 2 families honored the promise they had made before their children were born. Victor and Victoria lived for many years. They taught their children that words spoken before witnesses could shape a life, and that mockery did not make a vow powerless. They taught them to respect burial places, to show kindness to those who died without family, and to remember the name of the woman who had waited beneath the soil. Emily. In time, the path to the river changed. Storms brought down trees. Thorn bushes swallowed the old burial ground. The stones above Emily's grave sank slowly into the earth, but no finger ever rose there again. And that is where the old tale ends, with a living bride, a chastened bridegroom, and the nameless hunger of the grave returned at last to bones and dust. Thank you for listening. If this story made you think twice about every promise spoken in jest, leave a comment and tell me whether you believe the rabbinical court made the right decision. Should sacred words bind a person even when the vow was never intended? Or was the corpse bride asking the living to pay for a cruelty committed by the dead? If you enjoyed this horrifying tale, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you do not miss the next journey into darkness. Share it with someone who loves ancient folklore, ghost stories, and tales that should never be heard alone. Until next time, keep the candles burning, keep your doors locked, and never place a wedding ring upon anything reaching out of the earth. Good night.
Whispers of a love so true, painting dreams of me and you. And I'll hold you close in this moment.